You're driving home after a long weekend. Maybe you went hunting. Maybe you were at the range. The gun is secured in your center console, locked, legal, and out of sight. You haven't done anything wrong. Then you see the red and blue lights in your rearview mirror. You pull over, roll down the window, and the officer walks up. Everything seems routine until he asks the question that changes everything. Do you have any weapons in the car? Most people freeze, some panic. Many admit they have a firearm because they think honesty is the best policy, and they're right to be honest, but what happens next can spiral out of control fast. The officer seizes your firearm, runs the serial number, and suddenly you're being arrested for a crime you didn't commit, a clerical error, a misidentification, a database mistake, and now you're in handcuffs. Your kids are watching from the back seat, and your entire life is turned upside down. I've seen this happen. It's not rare. And the difference between driving away free and spending the night in a cell often comes down to one thing: knowing your Fourth Amendment rights. In this video, I'm breaking down exactly what you need to know if cops want to run the serial number on your gun. We'll cover Supreme Court case law, what you should say, and what you should absolutely never say. Stick with me, and you'll walk away knowing how to protect yourself without being rude or uncooperative. Before I break it down, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. You do not want to be searching for this video after you're already on the side of the road with an officer holding your gun. Let's start with a real example. A client of mine, let's call him Tom, was driving home after picking up his son from baseball practice. He got pulled over for failing to signal a lane change. Routine stuff. The officer asked if he had any weapons in the car. Tom told the truth. He said yes, he had a concealed handgun and he had a valid permit. The officer then asked Tom to step out of the car, retrieved the firearm, and ran the serial number. Moments later, the officer claimed the gun had been reported stolen. Tom was arrested on the spot. His son watched from the back seat, confused and terrified. Tom had bought the gun legally years ago from a private seller. It turned out to be a clerical error in the database. The charges were eventually dropped, but not before Tom went through a nightmare of legal fees, embarrassment, and trauma. What went wrong? Let's start with whether the officer was legally allowed to seize the firearm in the first place. The moment a police officer learns you have a firearm, courts have broadly granted them authority to secure it for officer safety. In United States v. Robinson, the Supreme Court noted that armed individuals, whether legally or illegally, pose a greater safety risk to officers. That means if an officer knows you have a gun, they can temporarily detain the weapon while the stop is ongoing. But here's the catch. Temporarily securing a weapon for safety is one thing. Extending the stop to run the serial number is something else entirely. In Rodriguez v. United States, the Supreme Court made it clear that officers cannot prolong a traffic stop beyond the time necessary to handle the original violation. If the officer finishes writing the ticket and then starts investigating something else, like running a serial number, without reasonable suspicion of another crime, that extension may be unconstitutional. And in Arizona v. Hicks, the court ruled that simply moving an object to read a serial number constitutes a separate search that requires its own independent probable cause. These cases together establish a powerful rule. If an officer extends a traffic stop to manipulate your gun and run the serial number, they may be violating your Fourth Amendment rights. Now let's talk about the plain view doctrine. If a gun is sitting on your passenger seat and the serial number is visible, the officer can read it without a warrant. That would likely be legal. But if the officer has to pick up the gun, move it, or manipulate it in any way to see the serial number, that's a different story. That's a search, and searches require probable cause or a warrant. This distinction matters a lot. Many officers will try to frame it as just checking or making sure it's safe, but once they start handling your property to investigate a crime, they've crossed a line. I also want to mention state laws because they vary dramatically. In Texas, we have the Motorist Protection Act, which allows you to carry a concealed firearm in your car without a license, provided you're not committing a crime like DWI. That's a pretty gun-friendly environment. But in states like California, New York, or New Jersey, the rules are much stricter. In some of those states, simply having a firearm, even legally, can trigger an arrest. You need to know your state's laws before you ever get behind the wheel. Let me give you another example. A client of mine named Maria was pulled over for a broken license plate light. She was a security guard working late nights. She informed the officer she had a firearm because she was in a duty to disclose state. The officer asked her to step out, seized her weapon, and ran the serial number without any additional probable cause. Maria felt uneasy, but she didn't resist. She reached out to me afterward and asked, "Was that legal?" The answer depends on where she was stopped, what the officer observed, and how long the stop lasted. But here's the bigger point. Maria didn't know she could have said something. She didn't know the difference between officer safety and an unlawful search. So where does this leave us? Can police run the serial number on your gun? The honest answer is, it depends. If you're in a state with strict gun laws, there's a good chance they'll find a way to justify it. But under federal law, they cannot unreasonably extend a traffic stop to investigate your firearm. If they do, any evidence they find may be thrown out. Now let's get practical. Here's exactly what you can do to protect yourself if an officer tries to run the serial number on your gun. First, never consent to a search unless you're required to disclose that you're carrying. If the officer asks, "Mind if I take a look?" say this, "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. Am I free to go?" You're not being difficult. You're exercising a constitutional right. And refusing consent doesn't make you look guilty. It makes you look informed. If an officer searches anyway without your consent, anything they find may be suppressed in court later. Second, if you're in a duty to disclose state, inform the officer that you're carrying, but do it calmly and clearly. Say, "Officer, I want to let you know I am licensed and carrying. My firearm is on my right hip. My hands are going to stay right here on the steering wheel. Do not reach for the weapon. Do not gesture toward it. Let the officer decide how to proceed. If you're not required to disclose, don't volunteer the information." Third, never grab for your gun. I can't say this strongly enough. If the officer asks you to hand over the weapon, move very slowly. Tell the officer what you're doing before you do it. Say, "Officer, I'm going to reach for my wallet. It's in my back pocket." Or, "Officer, the gun is in the center console. I'm not going to touch it. Please tell me what you'd like me to do." Your goal is to avoid any sudden movements that could be misinterpreted. Fourth, ask the right questions. If the officer wants to run the serial number, you can politely ask, "Officer, am I being detained? Do you have probable cause?" You have already refused consent to a search. If the officer keeps you waiting beyond the time needed for the original violation, that may be unlawful. You can say, "Officer, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. I will not answer further questions without my attorney present. Am I free to go?" This puts the officer on notice that you know your rights. Fifth, stay calm. Traffic stops are tense for everyone. If the officer gets nervous, don't borrow their anxiety. Keep your hands visible, your voice steady, and your movements slow. Emotional escalation is the number one reason traffic stops go sideways. Sixth, record if you can. Turn on your phone's audio and video. Get the officer's badge number and patrol car number. This creates an independent record of what happened. Officers write reports after the fact. Those reports often reflect their perspective, not the truth. Your recording can be the evidence that protects you in court. Seventh, know your state laws. Federal constitutional protections apply everywhere, but state law can give you additional rights or impose additional restrictions. If you travel with a firearm, research the reciprocity agreements and duty to disclose laws in every state you visit. Let me give you a full example of how a safe interaction might sound. The officer says, "Do you have any weapons in the car?" You say, "Officer, I do have a firearm. It is secured in my center console. I have a valid permit. My hands are on the steering wheel. What would you like me to do?" The officer says, "Step out of the car." You comply slowly. You leave your hands visible. The officer retrieves the gun and says, "I'm going to run the serial number." You say, "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. Am I being detained?" The officer says, "I'm just checking the serial number." You say, "I understand. I'm still exercising my rights. I will not answer further questions without my attorney present." Then you stay calm and let the officer do what they're going to do. You have preserved your defense for court if the search was unlawful. Practice these phrases at home. Say them out loud. When you're on the side of the road with an officer asking about your firearm, you don't want to think. You want your mouth to know what to say automatically. And remember, none of this is legal advice for your specific situation. Laws vary by state, and court interpretations can differ. If you're ever charged with a crime, consult a local attorney who knows the judges and prosecutors in your area. If this video helped you understand your rights when police ask about your firearm, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had a police officer run the serial number on your gun? What happened? I read every comment, and I will see you in the next video.